We have 3 people on the panel here: James Quilligan from EDA in the United States, and Isabel Carlisle from Devon in the UK, and Francisco Dines from Portugal. And the way that this is going to take place is that they are going to speak for 5 minutes each, and then I will pose some questions to them, to the panel, for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to all the participants to ask questions for a Q&A. So I want to mention that this topic is bioregional economies. And Daniel Christian Wall and I had the conversation a few days ago about this, and we joked about the irony of having a local economy conference online. But that is the world we're living in. Originally, the plan was to have this in Portugal, in the place and home of Francisco, in the Beira region of the middle of Portugal. And the work that James and the people in PRIP and the people in the EDA have done is related to that bioregion. And this work was presented by James yesterday and by Francisco and his team. So we hope that sometime in the near future, we'll be able to have a similar conference on the ground and to do this in person and to make it much more practical. However, ideas and theories are extremely important. The worldview, as I talked about in my presentation, the vision, just think about the donut economy as Isabel presented earlier, how important these kinds of concepts, metaphors, and systems are for the necessary system change that we need to make. So with that said, I would like to invite Francisco Dines from PRIP, from the Prout Research Institute in Portugal, to make a 5-minute presentation. And if you go way over time, I will let you know kindly. Okay. So please introduce yourself and start.
Okay, thank you. As Robert said, I'm working with the Prout Research Institute of Portugal. We are engaged with a vision for society that is from the progressive utilization theory. So there's this, from this vision, we are working in the PRIP in one part for implemented that is about economic democracy. And when we talk about economic democracy, we talk about decentralization. So the decisions must be as much as possible local. And yesterday there was a presentation, myself and Felipe, about the work that we are developing here. That is the block level planning. So we select this area that cover the very in the middle central Portugal, 3 municipalities, and we are developing a methodology to engage the local stakeholders in a planning for the benefit of the area. So that's one important work that we are doing. And these connections with the community, it's very, very important in our work. And at the same time, we are supporting local projects going on. So we have this more research aspect of our work, more we can say more academic, and also more facilitators of some process that can be in the future be benefits for the region. Because after this study, we expect that we can introduce with the group of stakeholders new policies that goes more with the vision for a more local development. And we have also support some projects that on this region. We help to develop one association that's called BioEco. It's an association for local for farmers and consumers that are like the organic way to produce their food. And we developed this for already 4 years. We are supporting now this association that was a platform for farmers and the consumers. Now we have a new phase that is introduce economy in association, so the farmers can have like a structure, a company that they can control to help them to sell their products. And also we have another project here because there's a network now. We are creating a network of projects here. There's an eco village also here, and we also want to develop some economic activity that can be funded for this project. So that's the way that I'm in personally on this kind of projects on this region of Portugal that you can call Beira Interior. So that is what I have to say for now as a presentation of my work inside of a team from the PRIP Association.
Thank you very much, Francisco. And I'll just hand the mic over to James.
Thank you, Roar. Francisco said it all. I don't know what else I could say. That's exactly what needs to be done. That type of model in other places. My background as an economist has led me here, and it's led me here from a kind of a strange direction, which is that I was a monetary specialist working in international development. And for the last over 20 years, I've been looking very closely at the commons, meaning that whatever land or culture or intellectual property that's not controlled by government, not controlled by business, it's controlled by people, or at least the remaining portions of that are controlled by people. As you know, the tragedy of the commons is not so much that people will fight over resources, it's that the real tragedy of the commons is that the commons have been stolen for us for a long time, increasingly over the last 500 years, particularly in the 20th century. And so they not only have the commons been stolen from us, they've even stolen the language about the commons, because most people don't even know what the commons are anymore. You say the word commons to some people, then they don't understand what you're talking about. That's fine. That's the way it goes. And we have to, if you don't know where you stand, you don't know where you're going. So that's what EDA, Economic Democracy Advocates, is trying to do, is clarify where we're at right now, and do it by explaining the broader picture of what's happening, but also quantifying it and bringing it into perspective so that we can do the block level planning that Francisco was talking about in his region. And we'd like to see this done everywhere. Now, the first steps of that mean essentially that a group of people in an area have to come together to figure out, look, this region needs its own independent decision making that's democratic, that really takes the best interests of the area in mind. The existing political structures, well, they may be doing some of that, but first of all, they don't necessarily overlap with the bioregion that we're living in. And secondly, they're not really paying close attention to it because they're paying more attention to politics and to corporate interests. And so they're not listening to the people's needs in the region. So that's what we're advocating for. We just created a new website, and we're very excited. We're launching it in a week from now. And so, yeah, that's the work that we're doing. And we like big databases. We like to be able to quantify things so that we can actually show it to representatives in a region, as well as to the politicians or to people in business, to say, here's what the situation is. Look at this very systematically and understand what the nature of the problem is. Because if you're only talking in terms of your impressions, you're actually contributing to the catastrophe rather than helping to solve it or to make it better. So those are the kinds of things that we're really interested in doing, and we really believe that regions should be making decisions on their own behalf with the people from within that region. But we also recognize that those decisions really do need to be based on quantitative information as well as qualitative information. So that's what we do, and that's where EDA is headed. And we specialize in the United States, although we have done a recent study in Portugal.
Thank you, James. Isabel?
Well, thank you very much for having me here. So I work in South Devon. South Devon is southwest England. It's the part of that leg in southwest England that kind of sticks out into the English Channel. We've been doing this work since early 2017. We draw on regenerative design. We also draw on systems thinking and a vision of Donella Meadows, in fact, for bioregional learning centers all across the world. We work at different scales. So our bioregion is defined by water. It's defined by the sea to the south. To the west, we have the River Tamar that divides us from the next county, Cornwall. To the east, the Rutine, and to the north, the headwaters or the springs, really, of all the rivers that flow down through our region down to the sea. So at a small scale level, we work quite a lot with water. We've got a project at the moment called Voices of the Dart. The Dart is our local river, which is about saving water. So we're working with our local water company, finding ways in which we can really engage local citizens around saving water, given that water is going to become such a key issue with climate change. And we are looking at both how access to data in real time and to the immersive creative experience of becoming water can mobilize communities to actually design their own water resilient futures. So that's one small thing we're doing in our watershed. But we're also working at very large scale, working, leading the whole process for the Devon Donut. That's working across the whole of Devon. Of course, that's not exactly a bioregion. We're bringing all the bioregional thinking, which is kind of taking all the skills that we've defined as bioregioning, things like being able to work at the edges, seeing whole systems, collaborating, prototyping and learning, things like that. We're bringing that into this process, which is a people's process. It's not funded by government. It's very much coming from the grassroots upwards, working with government and policymakers and academics and people of all kinds. And we're doing that to create a big conversation about the kind of future we want. So what kind of economy do we want in the future? So it would be a luxury to think that we could devolve from Westminster and become our own self-governing region. Maybe one day it will happen. But I said in my earlier talk, we're the most centralized state in Europe. And I think at some point that may happen, but certainly not now. So the methodology we're following, or the pathway we're following, is to look for pathways to action. So the donut framing has been incredibly helpful to get us to focus on all these different sectors. we focus on water body health, we focus on coastal marine health, or land use change on the outer ring of the donut. On the inner ring of the donut, we might go to political voice, or we might go to housing or transport. But that's given us an extraordinary access to all those different sectors as we invite them in for conversations in the collective. We also, for each domain, are devising indicators, and each indicator is separated into kind of two, behind the indicator sits two pathways to action. So on the one hand, we've got hard data, and on the other hand, we've got narrative data. Behind the hard data really sits policy making, and behind the softer data or narrative data sits citizen action. And we're holding the space between the two so that any kind of action that's taken is coordinated, and all the projects that sit behind those pathways to action will be, we hope, activated within the next year, or at least kind of one by one. There are a lot of projects there. But one key thing that we are doing all the time is bringing civil society into the frame and saying that we can't achieve, we can't achieve climate resilience without civil society being fully involved. And what is that role? What is the role of civil society? Not just taking action, but holding policymakers to account and having access to data, so that giving society access to data so that they can in real time see what's going on, which is what we intend the donut to do. We have one big donut for Devon, but also smaller donuts for local communities or for different sectors like water. So we say to people who join the Devon Donut Collective that the economy is not something out there. It's not something so huge we don't influence it. It's not just controlled by the World Bank or the IMF. All the zillions of decisions that we make personally contribute to the economy. And we're trying to give that understanding and sense of agency back to the people of our place.
Thank you, Isabel. Very nice. Thank you all, three of you, for those introductions. So in this session, I'm going to ask some questions, and sometimes I may ask a question to one of you, or I'll throw out a general question that any of you can address. So my first question is very broad, and I was hoping that we could get a little deeper into understanding what a bioregion is, because there are different ideas of what a bioregion is. I know that Francisco is involved with the Prout economic system, and Sarkar talks about socioeconomics in terms of a bioregion. He's not using the same term, but it's a very similar concept. So from each of you, what is a bioregion, and what defines a bioregion?
I'm going to pull up my definition, but so could somebody else go first before me?
Okay, James?
Yeah, of course. It's defined variously depending upon your background and your interests, and they're all very legitimate. The bioregion can be geological, it can be geographical, it can be topographic, it could be measuring flora and fauna. It could be increasingly it's seen as cultural, but one of the so those are all legitimate ways of seeing a bioregion. What we think is that in order to, so that when it gets down to actually measuring the scope of a bioregion, we spent a few years looking at this topic, and we we decided that the probably the best unit to measure was a watershed, but not a small stream or not a huge watershed, but a mid-sized watershed. A watershed that actually incorporates political communities at scale, so that if political decisions need to be made about that bioregion in conjunction with local people, at least there's that frame of reference to have that kind of medium-sized scale And it just so happens that a lot of measurements of watersheds are made at that scale. So do the political districts match up with the watersheds? No, not at all. But the fact is that by measuring it at that scale, you can bring in a couple of the political districts that share that bioregion to begin to make decisions for the population in that area. Remember that an ecosystem has to do with the population in a region that can be satisfied by the resources within that region. That's the reason why we're looking at bioregions. We're looking at bioregions because we're stressing their sustainability and the self-sufficiency for the people within those regions. That does not mean that we don't believe that trade from outside is important, or but what it does mean is that if people don't become self-sufficient within their bioregions, we're going to cause the bioregions to collapse, and probably the population will either leave or die off as a result of that collapse. So the bioregional philosophy, in a sense, is that we have to stay within our carrying capacity to make it regenerative, to make it work for the people living in the present as well as people in the future. And that's it in a nutshell. So it's I see it as something that is between the local and the national, or even the state, or and then the national, and certainly the global, but somewhere in a middle kind of portion where you have something that local communities can scale up to their regional areas, and then actually be able to make a political difference in making the decisions within their watershed. So for me, the ideal unit is a watershed that is regional in scope.
All right, thank you, James. Isabel?
Sure. So we have at least 5 watersheds in our bioregion. Our individual watersheds are too small to call a single bioregion. I mean, obviously you can call a watershed a bioregion, but it wouldn't function in the way that we want bioregions that we work with to function, i.e. to have viable systems in them, like food systems or water systems. So we are covering the whole of South Devon. We're bounded by water, as I said at the beginning. We also think or know that bioregions have coherence. They have coherence of geology, geography, land use, rainfall, and so on, but also coherence of human culture. So it's also a place you can call home. When you enter your bioregion, you've got a sense of being in the place that knows you, and you know that place. But let me read out to you the definition we use at the South Devon Bioregional Learning Centre. We say, a bioregion invites us to inhabit a place in a way that is full of relationship. Seeing where the natural boundaries of our bioregion are, we can then see the many ecosystems and human systems alive within it. All of these systems, like fresh water and biodiversity, or transport and health, are connected. There is also a connecting story that starts in deep geological time, shows up in the landscape and soil, and then in human culture. Bioregioning is the collective practice of bringing vitality to these connections, angling the systems towards regeneration, and taking actions for a climate resilient and biodiverse future. So obviously there are lots of layers in that, but we've tried to kind of capture what we mean in that paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you, Isabel. Yes, Francisco, go ahead.
Yes. So in the proud presentation, there's a concept that is we are following, and it's very similar with the bioregional. Bioregions, it's a samage. Then for you to see in the map, or you can draw. You can see also the physical aspects, the similarities on the ground, the ecosystem, the fauna and the flora. But also it's very important the people that are living. There must be some cultural link among the people, some historic that they can feel they are together to achieve some goals on local development. So this kind of scale, it's the idea. It's okay. It's like a region between the very local and the national broad, more a big scale. So there's these characteristics, the ecosystem that people are living, and the cultural aspects of that. And it's very important for planning for development, because the aim here is people to be self-sufficient. We should understand the problems that people are facing, economic, social, etc., and see the potentials of the region, and then make plans that people can develop. Not the plans from outside, but with the people, with the local, the stakeholders, the leaders and institutions local. They can be aware of their potentials and help to process. So that's what I can say now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, very interesting. So this many similar ideas here about what a bioregion is. And I guess one of the common threads is that a bioregion, as James mentioned, does not necessarily conform to a political region or political area. And then the second point, as Isabel sort of alluded to, is that it can contain several watersheds or a bigger area. So you are talking about a nested network of regions based on many different, parts: the geology, topography, the culture, the economic resources, and so on and so forth. And the beautiful thing about the whole concept of bioregion is that it is coming from the grassroots in many different ways. Like Sarkar is from India, not well known outside of India. And then in Europe and in the United States, it has sort of evolved over time, and there are different versions of it. So my next question is sort of looking at the contrast between development, sustainable development, as the World Bank, the different corporations, the United Nations, and so on. They have terms that sound very bioregional and friendly to the environment. For example, the local economic development idea by the World Bank, for example, is basically the process in which local business and the non-governmental sector partners with the corporations to improve the economic growth of an area. And they frame this in a very nice way to look as if, and then of course it is often painted in a sustainable development fashion as well. So what is the main difference between a bioregional development model and the current top-down sustainable development model? This is open for any one of you.
Okay, I'll have a go at tackling this one. So I essentially, it depends on what the assumptions are that you're doing with your bioregion, of course. So whoever works with a bioregion has various assumptions about what they want to see happen in their bioregion. And I'd say that for the most part, they're very allied to new economy thinking. So they're very allied to donut economics or we all, or any kind of thinking that is not about growth. So it's not about resource extraction. It's not about maximizing profit. It's much more about taking a regenerative approach and thinking about how can we as people who are dwellers in that land, how do we invest in that place? And so the kind of new economy initiatives that we see here in South Devon, to things to do with food systems or generating local energy, for instance, are very much in contrast to the powers that be in Devon, the local enterprise partnership, which is dictating our economic policy. So our local enterprise partnerships are essentially non-elected quangos of business people who are not accountable either, but have a lot of money from Westminster, from central government, in order to invest in development in the industrial military complex and so on. And here in our bioregion, we've got a new nuclear power station, and they're investing a lot of money in a whole industrial complex around the nuclear power station. So some of that thinking is needed, clearly, in order to generate jobs in our place. But what we see happening in South Devon is that there's a very strong network of people already working in relocalizing the economy or in social enterprise or the various aspects of new economic thinking. And 80% of our economy in Devon is anyway small, medium or micro. It's not big corporations, it's small businesses. And that challenge of aggregating small things to make something larger that has an impact is not something that the big economic players want to do. And yet that's where we think the big gains are. Can't hear you, Roel.
You are muted.
Yeah, it sounds like one of the differences is that the local economic development model is very much confined within economic development to improve and to think about growth, economic growth. But the bioregional concept is taking the environment and the culture and the real needs of the local population more into account. James, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah. The way economics has evolved is we're emphasizing the supply more than the demand today. But if you look at the way an ecosystem is structured, an ecosystem is very dynamic, but the principle of an ecosystem essentially is, as I was mentioning earlier, is that you have resources within that ecosystem that meet the needs of the organisms within that ecosystem. So in this case, the organisms, we're talking about all of life, but the organisms that we're particularly focused on here in this discussion, I think mostly are human beings. So we want to ensure that life continues, it flourishes in the present, it sustains itself into the future. Economics itself was never set up on that basis. It doesn't look at things like that. Economists have either grown up in the tradition of working with markets in mind or with governmental units in mind. And sometimes they overlap, sometimes they're in contention with each other. But the fact is, what's been left out are the regional economics of the situation, and not only the regional economies, but also obviously the commons. People are evicted from their commons. The economy suffers. Corporations swoop in to manage that local area, or the government steps in to do it. And there are political ideologies that war over that, deciding that whether capitalism is better than socialism. And, we've seen a long history of that. So in the meantime, what's happened to our bioregions? Well, they've been degraded. But by the same token, what's also happened in society is that people are suffering. They've been displaced from their commons. made to go into industrial work and take low-level jobs. And so what we're seeing essentially is two things happening that are fairly broad and yet interrelated, but we don't always hook them up together. One is that we're creating more and more ecological degradation. The other is that we're creating greater and greater poverty. Those two things are interrelated because they're both results of our overemphasis on surplus in the economies rather than meeting human need and meeting need that's in alignment with the needs of the environment of that particular area where those people live. So from that point of view, I look at this as, the donut is a very good model for bringing all the variables together. But in the longer picture, what this is really about is transforming the way economics works, because economics at the moment is the real definer of value in our world. The first thing that the ecological economists did in the 1980s was, in the 70s, was go out and begin to price ecosystems. If we could just put a price on that ecosystem, then we'll solve all the problems. Well, it's exactly the wrong thing to do. Now you've created a feasibility study for somebody else to go out and buy that commons. That's not what we're after. We're trying to manage the bioregions better. So the idea then goes back to the idea that it's not top-down because corporations and governments are trying to do that top-down model. It's bottom-up because people within the bioregion need to be able to manage their own bioregion. Haven't been given the space or the opportunity to do that. There's a really worldwide phenomenon now of people around the world not organizing globally, but organizing within their own regions to be able to make this happen. And we're all comparing notes and we're looking at best practices, and the field is emerging. I've been watching it emerge for 25 years. It was emerging before under the guise of international development for a while. But my sense is that the bottom-up economy is very important because that is the only thing that's going to solve those two major so-called externalities, which is poverty and ecological degradation, which the current regime of political economy says they are externalities. We see them as problems on the horizon, but they really don't matter because that's not what our objective is. Okay, what's their objective? It's supply side economics, surplus value. That's what they're trying to do. What we're saying is, if you put supply and demand in conjunction, you get the wrong formula. It should say supply and need. So we're not really dealing with demand, we're dealing with human need. We can get that aligned and understand that there needs to be a shift from emphasis on supply to meeting human need. Then I think the ecological factors will also come into play. And the bioregion is the ideal unit to make that all work. So I see it very much from an economic point of view, but I also understand that there's a whole discourse that can be spoken about within groups like ours to talk about it purely in terms of the ecology. But I try to broaden it out into a different picture occasionally.
Yeah, thank you, James. So in other words, we're talking about a need-based economy as opposed to a greed-based economy. And when you're talking about demand, you mean the demand for the real needs of the people, and that has to be supplied by the supply side economy, so that they are working together in synchrony, those two aspects of the economy. I wanted to get back to something you touched on in another question regarding the donut system and the economics to support the donut concept. But before we get to that, I wanted to let Francisco speak.
Yeah, I would like to give an example from this region. It's the location of the local resources. So at national level, it was make a decision to support some projects of farming very intensive in this region, monoculture way of production. So they bought a lot of hectares of land and they just plant almonds. And this was a decision taken by the national government to support the local municipalities by law could not block these decisions. And that is an example of something, it was foreign companies doing that. And it's an example here that the productions goes to outside markets. The job creations on this, because everything is very high tech, the job creation is not so much. So, and the profits from the region goes outside. So the money goes out, the wealth goes out. So this is a way that we want to avoid to have here. So this is an example that it's not just in this region, also in the south of Portugal, this way of farming with big companies from outside. They promise to create jobs and wealth, but at the end, this wealth is withdrew from the local, using the resources, the water, because this system are very intensive. There was water, so potential there will be problems of water for other farmers because there's a irrigation system there. So this is an example that we should not follow if you want to focus on the regional development and the way that we can influence the policies to change this kind of decisions. Most important here is to allocate these resources to local projects, economic projects that can people can feel that they are or private projects or community projects that people can create their jobs. They pay attention for the needs of the community and create economy inside of this region. Another example, it is the food for the public canteens. For many years, it was almost not allowed the local producers to supply the canteens because there is a European Union rules for where people should present their proposals. And of course, the big companies have advantage because they have the best price. And at this moment, they are open here with the municipalities, another way that local farmers can present some food and with better quality products for the schools because there will be a support. So this is a way to support local people and local economic initiatives. I like very much the Preston model, and this is a way to apply local needs, supply as much as possible with local production, so we can create a local economy, and the money, the wealth is kept inside of the regions.
Yeah.
Rory, you are muted.
Yeah, thank you, Francisco. So what you're speaking about is the growing need for these kinds of examples, as is happening in Devon, in the Preston model, and the work that EDA, James Quilligan's organization, is doing, is that work becomes part of not only local policy, but also regional and national policy. And I think that this is about time, but it is going to happen. And when Daniel talked earlier about this is a journey that we're on, I think that's the journey we are moving towards, that these grassroots movements and these grassroots activities will have to trickle up, so to speak, into a more national policy. And when that happens, a real groundbreaking change can take place. In order for that to happen, and I wanted to, for the last minute, just see if you can address one important aspect, and especially for James as an economist, what kind of an economic system do we need, James? I know that you have studied the Proud system and other alternative economic systems. Maybe you could address that. Frame it maybe within the donut framework, which is a wonderful framework. What would that donut economy look like on the ground if you just spend a little time envisioning that?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. If you don't mind, I'm going to just share this screen. Someone had asked, what is the Preston model? And maybe we can use this to illustrate the donut economy a bit. So we can, bring a few threads together.
Yeah.
This is a model that has been evolving in Preston in the UK, at the other end from Devon, and it's very interesting because it was conceived over a period of time by some people who began to operate in an existing community to begin to do all the things that you see here, creating good jobs and providing the good jobs for the community residents. And they kind of masterminded it so that they could bring people in from the outside to create the public bank or to create the credit union. So you get the idea that this was created in order to facilitate, to create a synergy within the community. Worker cooperatives, public pension fund, with the anchor institutions like universities and hospitals, like there. So emphasis on public services, small businesses, public utilities, and it's been very successful, and it's become a model for the Cleveland model, which is happening, or it's also called the Evergreen model in the United States and other places. So, given all that, the folks who put this together didn't have access to the donut. This model's been evolving for about 15 or 20 years in Preston, but the ideas essentially are the same. I mean, if you want to look at the donut model, essentially is looking at the planetary limits, and there's from the Rockstrom model that's out there, and incorporating to mitigate those planetary limits, how are we going to design socioeconomic conditions to do that? How are we going to adapt or mitigate the problems that are out there in terms of the slowing degradation of the resources across the planet? And there's a number of things that Rockstrom has identified as being in trouble, from the nitrogen cycle to the carbon cycle to the hydrological cycle. There's a lot that's going on. So the model here with Preston essentially was that beginning with those big institutions that you have control over, you identify an institution within your community to say, okay, how does this best serve the idea of addressing or at least adapting to the particular ecological limitation that's taking place in a planetary way, and then how can we best create institutions here on the ground to make that happen? So that's why cooperatives take the place of big businesses, because smaller cooperatives don't leave an ecological footprint. They don't have money that's made in the area that's siphoned out of the community. And so it's not an export-led economy. It's very much a locally or regionally self-contained economy. So for each of those kind of planetary limits, different aspects of those decisions made about creating the institutions are meant to partly address those ecological problems as well as the economic and social problems that are on the ground. So that's how I would sum it up. But you could go down the list and talk about, the locally owned businesses and the various the small housing projects and the anchor institutions, and all of those have a part to play in this particular Preston donut economy.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, James. So in other words, what you're talking about is the need for restructuring economics to serve as the engine of live within the concept of the donut. Yeah, I think that this is really key, not only on the local level, but also on the planetary level. And the present model is a good example of that. Isabel or Francisco, would you like to add something to this?
I didn't really have a lot to add, James. That was a really good explanation of it all. I think what the donut does, it obviously slices the economy in a different way to the Preston model. Certainly the Preston model has been a game changer in things like local procurement. And the fact that we're getting a Bank of the Southwest here in our part of the world will be a game changer for us as well, because we'll be able to get funding for smaller enterprises, which at the moment, small regenerative or new economy enterprises simply can't get from the big banks. I think that this issue about aggregation to me is very important. The fact that there are a lot of small things happening across our county, whether it's kind of small regenerative agriculture projects or a lot of small cooperatives or a lot of small businesses who are part of the green economy that are not joined up. And I think this kind of function of aggregation, so that you start to see the impact that all these small actions are making at larger scale. I think that's only when that happens, then the larger economic players will start to sit up and take notice.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. Francisco?
Yeah, this is aligned with the Prout theory about this. Because in Prout it defends the idea of small business, not big business, and the community, what James was in the beginning saying, the commons, no? The community through cooperatives or other legal way of doing, so people can share some economic enterprise, and they can create wealth locally in a more democratic way of doing. And of course, there will be always big, complex industries that should be in the public hands to serve the economy, like energy, etc., etc. So it's aligned with what we defend in the Prout Institute in Portugal.
All right, thank you, Francisco. So now we're going to open it up to everyone to ask questions. And first in line is Brian, who raised his hand, and then Dill has written a question that I'll read after Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Roar. Bear with me, there's quite a bit of background noise. I had posted the question to chat, and then as I listened to the panelists' responses, if I was hearing correctly, if I was tuned in, I believe I heard consensus kind of across from all three panelists regarding my question about order or hierarchy. I mean, I recognize that we're working with, complex adaptive systems in terms of design and kind of management and operation. I really like what James had to say, kind of a reminder with respect to the new economy model, Roar, and check me on this. I'm not sure if I got that. It's small, independently owned and operated business, and then to transitioning in scale to co-ops, transitioning in scale to those systems that are kind of beyond the scope of either private ownership, cooperative ownership, and owned and operated by the state, essentially, and that.
Mhm.
That's kind of, that seems really viable. I mean, as kind of an orienting principle with respect to, I think in what I had presented in the chat window was Kate Rayworth's, I think it's a more recently developed idea of the 5 factors of enterprise. And that seems to be, she doesn't necessarily present them as a hierarchy, but moving from purpose to network to governance. And then interestingly, kind of the proximity or relationship between governance and ownership as it translates into finance, which entails value kind of over time. So I'm just interested, if panelists or yourself have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. A very interesting point. In other words, if I understand you correctly, you're talking about the 3-tier system of economics: small scale, privately owned business, corporations moving into worker-owned or stakeholder businesses, as it is sometimes called, cooperatives, and then government enterprises that are serving the people and the environment with proper policies and with proper operations. For example, when it comes to infrastructure and so on and so forth, supporting an alternative solar energy grid, for example, with government funds and money. That's really the role of government. So, so this is basically the Prout economic structure, but it is emerging in different areas. We see it in the next economy or the new economy model. We see it within other alternative green economic thinkers and so on. So let's open this up to the panel, and any one of you can address this. Is this the emerging model?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I do think that if you look at the basic structure of what's happened in the past, you've had since the Treaty of Westphalia, you had nation states. That's like, let's say, what, 15th century, 16th century. We've had nation states, and they've actually begun to charter corporations, like in East India Company and all the agents of colonialization around the 16th century, 17th century. And so that's what we know now as the governments and the corporations that we have. So there's a historical precedent for it. Before that, there was much more commoning going on. And so I like the idea of bioregioning. There was a lot of that going on. Actually, communities were much more bioregionally based in the earlier days. So what we've got now is a kind of 3-sector system in which we have corporations and governments, but we have this third sector we call civil society. or we call it, sometimes we call it communities, or we call it people's voices, or, popular discourse, or grassroots economics, or what, there's a third place that's much weaker than the other two because they're very strong agents, but we're still holding space for that in our, collective models. So I think what happens is with this new economy, we're talking about, when you're looking at the corporations, we're talking about small businesses, I think, that do maintain some of the incentives of the present monetary system, at least in terms of the right to take a reasonable profit. And then you've got, for corporations, morphing or evolving, governments evolving into utilities that that small communities couldn't provide on their own. And if we're downsizing the corporations into small businesses, we ought to be able to think of government utilities as being able to provide, as Francisco was saying, energy for people, as well as water systems and sewer systems and the kinds of public utilities that we're used to, and that governments have shown that they can provide those services pretty well. And then the third sector, I think, in terms of the civil society, that's the area that I think needs to move into the development of new cooperatives. So I don't necessarily see the small businesses evolving into cooperatives, although that's definitely possible. But I think it represents this other kind of model. I think represents the idea that the cooperatives actually emerge into this vacuous area that we're calling civil society now. And the reason I think that could flourish is that, as Paul Hawkins said, there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civil society groups out there trying to promote something. And if these were turned into cooperatives, it could be a really exciting and dynamic kind of economy. And by the way, there's a question in the chat I would like to get to it eventually, which is about how is it conceivable that that we could overturn a top-down monetary system to make all of this work? And if there's chance at the end, I'd like to address that.
I'd just like to add something from what we see from our perspective here in Devon, which is that we rely on big government or big companies to provide the infrastructure we need to function. So whether it's our power system like Western Power here in the southwest of England, which has no more capacity to take clean renewable energy into the grid, or whether it's the government that's not investing in coastal defences, or whether it's our water companies and the Environment Agency that are not able to stop the pollution of our rivers. And in response to all that, we're seeing a very interesting pushback, if you like, from civil society. So civil society organizing itself to hold these big organizations and their failures to account, and to actually start to take action. So citizens becoming their own citizen scientists, or putting together teams of scientists to advise them on water quality, for instance. So I think we are seeing a very interesting way in which civil society is moving into this space of thinking about governance of common pool resources, and also thinking about solutions that don't just require huge investment, which doesn't look like it's going to happen in time to build our climate resilience.
Roar, you are muted again.
Thank you both, James and Isabel, for those comments. I'll now turn the mic to Elizabeth.
Unmute. My first question actually is to ask James the name of his organization. I didn't get it.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, fine. Put it in the chat. Thanks. My other question, though, main question is, and I actually asked it last time about capitalism and also talking about, and I'm from the States, obviously, you have the Green New Deal that everybody's talking about, but it's not really green. And they're not talking about the resources that you will need to have all this green energy, in quotes. How indigenous people in this country are fighting against having these huge electric companies coming to their land. Actually, I'm in California, and there is a large demonstration against one of these companies there in Hamul. I think it's near Hamul. So how does this fit in? I just don't see it. I see that even people talking about the Green New Deal don't really talk about the things that you're talking about. They're talking about having the Green New Deal within the capitalist system. And you can't have a Green New Deal within the capitalist system. I guess that's my comment and question.
Right.
Yeah, very good point. I once wrote an article about the green capitalism being an oxymoron. So that's right on point. So would anyone address that? It's open to anyone on the panel. Isabel, Francisco.
I think it's absolutely right. You can't have a Green New Deal really within the current economic system. Because we look at what, just to give the example of our local enterprise partnership here in Devon, which has a large amount of funding from central government to pursue big growth enterprise. When we kind of challenge them or talk to them, in a friendly way about what their intentions are and demonstrate what the donut is doing, what it's revealing, if you like. We put the lens of the donut over their actions. They're sympathetic, but they say we can do nothing. Our policy is driven from Westminster. We get our funding from Westminster. We have to toe the party line. So it all comes down to party politics. So we are in that kind of bind at the moment where the power rests in the hands of people who are completely wedded to the industrial military complex, however you want to describe it, or the kind of growth economy. And yet, at the same time, in the grassroots, there are all these new innovations springing up and all these workarounds and all this connecting is happening. So it's like we've got all these things going on all at the same time. And that's what makes me feel quite hopeful about the future.
Thank you. Francisco?
Yes, this Green New Deal, you are using the same system. Maybe you can be more efficient in the consumption of resources, new technology, but the system of power to make decisions would be the same. So some big companies, some persons, not so many, taking the big decisions and using the resources from the local to the global market. I don't see so much difference to it inside of this actual capitalist system. So a new approach must be taken.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Francisco. James?
Yeah, I would just add that very simply, the Green New Deal is a top-down kind of framework, and it's about throwing money at the problem. Well, they could, the original New Deal in the United States was effective, but look what's happened in the meantime. It got turned around. Many of the institutions and policies were put into place, and it did a lot of good until our policies in the United States changed. And then now it's those are legacy institutions, but we now to try to create a Green New Deal in the same image as being able to do deficit spending, to be able to pay for all these goodies to fix the environment, which is badly needed, is really wrong-headed policy, and it would indebt the centralized system in the United States to say, well, that system can't, it's too big to fail, even though it's going to go bankrupt if it was to adopt a policy of massive deficit spending. So what I'm getting at is this, that I think we have to be really careful here, because we can say that, okay, the opposite of centralization is decentralization, and that's true. But I would rather call it like polycentrism, or something where you have nested kinds of decentralization, because we're seeing a lot of misinterpretation of decentralization now. For example, I think in the field of cryptocurrency, for example, they call it decentralization. Yes, it is. It has that quality, but it doesn't escape the idea that those systems that they're decentralizing are still investment schemes, and they tie into the more centralized economy. So you have to be very careful, I think, when we're talking about decentralization, because especially in a kind of new framework, where if we're going to really talk about the bottom up elaboration of what these bioregional economies are, and or bioregional decision-making systems, then I think decentralization has to be scrutinized at all moments, because the fact is that if we end up embedding ourselves back into the old monetary system, then what have we done? We haven't made any headway at all. We've actually gone backwards, because we've given the centralized system a way of eventually being able to control the bioregions. We don't want that. That's not where we're going.
Okay. Thank you all for those great answers. Would you like to, we have just a couple of minutes left. Would you like to address that question, James, regarding the monetary system and the top-down?
Yeah, thank you. I would. One of the things that they're proposing in the United States for the Green New Deal, how to finance it, is they're rationalizing it with this idea of modern monetary theory. And I'm not going to go into the real extent of that, what it means, but you could look it up, and it's becoming a very popular idea. So the idea is that, look, governments don't have to balance their budgets; they can just continue to borrow infinitely. Well, and they make an elaborate argument about why that's right. So for me, it's another instance of rationalism, meaning that sure, you can make any argument you want, and it doesn't mean that it conforms to reality. And the reality is that we have an ecological deficit in the world. Now, we know how to measure it in biological terms or ecological terms, but it doesn't translate much into the economy. And there's a reason for that, which is that, as I was saying earlier, economists see ecological degradation as an externality, so they're not going to account for it. But the fact is that we can measure that ecological debt. Now, what I'm suggesting is, and there's a lot more to be said about this, but the ecological debt and the economic debt that we have across the world are mirror images of each other. And why? Can make it very simple. When the rich world, through colonialism, began to borrow from developing countries, what were they doing? They were enslaving people, and they were also using the slaves to extract raw materials from the developing countries. So two things going on there. There's social degradation, social inequality, and there's also ecological degradation. They're actually removing resources from one place to another. Well, all of that led to not only economic debt and the legacy of that on one hand, it's also led to an ecological debt. And we have not connected those two things together yet. Bioregions are the last vestige for civil society to transform itself into the agents for making our bioregions into really viable units for all the things that that our panelists are talking about, I think, meaning that if people are empowered to make better decisions about the political and economic and social and cultural aspects and ecological aspects of their bioregion, then we've been in a much better position. So how to do that? Here's an idea. If we were to
Make it quick, James.
Sure. Okay.
We're up for time, but yeah, make a quick
Right.
summary.
Sure. I just need to put an ending to this, meaning that if we were to take our non-renewable resources today and say, let's decide how much we're going to appropriate to people in the present, how much to save for the future, then we make sure that those resources saved for the future are in a lockbox. We don't touch them. That in itself creates a value, which is a new kind of value, meaning that we know we've sustaining monetary policy into the future. We're sustaining resources into the future. That creates a kind of value that we can use in the present to create a new kind of monetary system that will fund sustainability, and it will do a lot of other things. Anyway, I could go into a lot of detail about that, but that's just there is a solution to this, I think.
Yes, thank you, James and Isabel, Francisco. This has been an incredible discussion and an incredible group of people and wonderful questions. We could go on all night, but we have to end here because we have an exciting program coming up called The Crucial Role of Story in Systems Change with Alina Siegfried. Culture is such an important part of bioregional development, bioregional change, and system change. So please hang on and let us introduce Alina Siegfried. Alina Siegfried. Yeah. Hi, Alina.
Hello.
Hello. Good to see you. So I just wanted to mention that you're a poet and spoken word artist. And with that, I just want to give the word over to you.
Kia ora, thank you, Roa. And thank you, Carolina, and hello to everybody. I'm calling in this morning, it's my morning, from Wellington, New Zealand, which I understand is probably a long way away from the majority of you. And it's wonderful to be here. I've been following the System Change Alliance for some time and very much a fan of the work. So yes, I'm here to talk to you today around story and narrative to support systemic change. And we have an interactive workshop session today with the opportunity for you all to explore some new and old narratives around local economies. And then afterwards, I'll be doing a few of my spoken word pieces in a performance, as I understand it, to close out the conference. So I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about me. I'm going to do that. I'll start my presentation first, actually, and then I'll jump into it. So I'm just going to share a screen. If you can all let me know if you can see that screen there. Thumbs up. Anybody?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
We can see your screen.
Wonderful. Okay. So I need to start the slideshow. Oh, sorry. Okay. Here we go. So essentially, what we're talking about with all of this conference is systems change in the basket of local economies. And the way I see it, systems change really at the root of it is cultural change. It's change around the anthropogenic systems that we have built and the way that we interact with the natural systems around us. And at the root of any culture, what we have built the foundations of our cultures on is really story and narrative and myth. It is humans who've made up the operating systems of our world, and thus it is us who can change it. Systems change really is, many of you will be familiar with this diagram here. And it really outlines what is required for true systemic change to come about. And you'll see at the top level there are all the very structural, more tangible or obvious elements of systems change, the policies, the practices and resource flows. So this is where you see things like social enterprise or philanthropy and the resource flows, or practices like corporate social sustainability and governance and so on. And of course, economic policies and social policies, very much the very explicit stuff that you can see day to day. A level down, you've got relational change, and that's where we see we're seeing a little bit more movement in that space between relationships and connections with movements like Black Lives Matter, or conversations around the Me Too movement around different shifting power dynamics and what roles those play. But at the very bottom there, you've got transformative change, and that's very much around the mental models around how we think about the way the world is. And it's very much at these bottom two levels, the semi-explicit and the implicit, that I work at as a narrative strategist and as a storyteller for systems change. Now, I think I've actually skipped a slide. I'm just going to go up a couple to see if I can find, here it is, yes. I'm going to go back a couple of moments. In Aotearoa, New Zealand here, it's traditional to introduce yourselves with a Māori welcome, a mihi mihi as such, that describes your connection to the land and how we came to be here. So I'm going to go into this first before proceeding any further. Yeah, I'll translate in a moment. Ko mako tere te maunga, ko waimakarere te awa, ko Cressy, ko SS Australis, ngā waka, ko Witihana, ko Pākehā, ngā iwi, ko Alina Siegfried tako ingoa, no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So what I've done just now is grounded myself in relationship with the lands that I'm doing my work upon, and also introduced myself to you in terms of both my natural and human ancestors. So you've got a picture there of Maukatari, or Mount Grey, as it was the colonizers called it, down in the Canterbury region of New Zealand, which is where my mother's side of the family first settled, along with the Waimakarere River. And you've got images there of both the Cressy and the SS Australis, which by way of my father and my mother's side of the family came to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And then I just introduced myself and said greetings to one and all of you. Great, thank you. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides ahead again now, because I was ahead of myself a moment ago. So yes, going back to the place where I work, in that implicit transformative place of change. Really, humans are hardwired for story. That's the operating system that our brains are built upon. We may think in this modern day and age that we have us clever humans have triumphed above the natural world, or that we have figured everything out. and that we are rational, clever creatures, but really it is story that hits to our hearts and moves us to action much more readily than facts and figures. So stories build bridges between different people towards shared meaning and understanding things, and understanding a complex world in a way that we can agree on. They demonstrate our values in action and tell other people what we are about, really. And again, they really work at that implicit level, hitting hearts over minds and convincing people much more readily than say reports or facts or figures. I think Maya Angelou summarizes it very aptly here with this quote that people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And for me, that sums up exactly what story does, is it makes us feel something and understand something innately inside. So to just look at the DNA of really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about story in the world of systems change, if we want to flip the triangle on its head here, really I see at the very foundations of our culture is myth, and I use the word here myth as in a sort of a narrative that holds a seed of truth, and it really is most of the time very much unspoken and assumed. And that's, I mean, it's a close cousin of narrative, the way I see it. And you might hear me sometimes speak about mythic narratives. And narratives in this sense, I'm speaking about the assumptions that we have about the way the world is. So the assumptions that we have around the role of the economy, or the role of money, or the role of productive work, and how that interacts with our economies and with our societies. At the level above that, you've got the more explicit stories that people are familiar with. Those are the tales with the beginning, middle, end, the tangible things where there's characters involved, and it's a little more subjective. And at the very tip of the iceberg, but also incredibly important, is the role of framing and language, and exactly how you tell a story, and how you describe the characters, and how you describe all the different moving parts of the system, and whether it's really, what the goals. Framing and language is where it really comes out what the goals of the story that you're trying to tell are. And we see that a lot, of course, in the realm of politics and media, when any given story can be cut perhaps 100 different ways. That's where framing and language is, of course, makes all the difference. I've got another quote here to just talk about a little bit about what I mean by myth. And I'm going to go into this in a minute, because it's something that I speak about quite a lot in the book that I'm about to launch next month. But Yuval Noah Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, has said any large-scale human cooperation, whether a modern state, a medieval church, an ancient city, or an archaic tribe, is rooted in common myths that only exist in people's collective imagination. So again, that's going back to that idea that it is we humans who have come up with the stories, the myths and narratives that underpin the way that things are in the world. And therefore, the flip side of that is that we can change them. I'm giving you a few examples here in the next few slides of what I mean when I'm talking about myths. And I'm just going to check if I've skipped a slide again. Something funny going on here. Yeah, I have, yep. So I want to clarify, when I'm talking about myth, in this day and age, myth has become a little bit of a dirty word. It's become synonymous with lies, or falsehood, or a theory that, we believed before we knew better, or that has been since proven to be untrue. So we hear throwaway phrases all the time, like, climate change is a myth, or trickle-down economics is a myth, and it has this very negative connotation about it, that means myth is a bad thing. Even the practice of myth busting is pulling apart somebody else's argument and really taking pride in the fact that you've myth busted something and you are right, and therefore that other person is wrong. So it's really got a bit of a bad rap these days, myth. But I'm very much interested in reclaiming the much older sense of the word myth, being that it was an innate human truth wrapped up in a story. And with that in mind, and my book has got 10 new myths for humanity in the final chapter, where I reframe some of the current narratives that I see are harmful in terms of a thriving, healthy planet and a global population, and reframe them into new myths that I think can take us towards the systemic change that's needed to have a much more regenerative, just and equitable place to call home. So the first of those reframes of mythic narratives in my book is from me to we. So really reframing a culture of individualism, which is much stronger, of course, in some nations than others, to a much larger sense of who is we. It's not just me and you. It's not just the people in this room. It's not just the people in our little bubble who we get along well with or who we share views with. It's really a call to a much larger we, even to the point of we being the human race. So that's one of the narrative shifts or new myths that I'm presenting. And when I say new myths, these, of course, are not at all new myths. They're incredibly ancient myths. They are myths that perhaps humanity has forgotten and needs to be reminded of. From there, I extend that to the natural world, and pointing out that we need a reframe in terms of what our relationship is with nature and to see ourselves as not separate from nature, but that we are nature. And I mean, really interesting movements, even in some scientific fields that are starting to lend some weight to that sort of hypothesis, and developments around quantum physics, and even the fact that we exchange the vast majority of the atoms in our body every year with the world around us. We literally are made of the same matter, the same cells. So that's another one of them. From there, I guess there's a certain big piece around a new myth of what it is to have a good and happy and successful life, and really that consumerism and buying ever more stuff, which we get all sorts of intrinsic messages daily that tell us that this is the key to a good and happy life, is to accumulate a lot of material wealth. And we're really, a lot of us know deep down, when it came down to it, if we lost everything, having good people around and having a safe and warm place to live is often enough. So it's one of my myths in the book as well, from stuff to enough. And again, tied in with that is really adopting much more of a mindset of abundance rather than a mindset of scarcity. And the reality of scarcity, particularly with foods or other goods, or access to education or access to healthcare. So many of our forms of perceived scarcity in this world are, of course, manufactured forms of scarcity that are firmly grounded in the economic system, in the global economic system that we find ourselves with. So what might it look like to really have much more of a myth of abundance that is guiding us, and develop our food systems and all our systems in accordance with that mythic narrative. There's a fantastic article on the Stanford Social Innovation Review that I would point you all to, by Ella Saltmarsh, who's a narrative strategist and another storyteller for change. And she describes 3 functions of story in changing systems. And the first is story as light. So in this function, story shines a light on the faults in a system. It illuminates the outliers. It shows us the way, basically. Stories as glue provides a certain amount of social cohesion and coherence. It connects people to one another as we find shared meaning. And then from glue, we go to web as more and more of these stories start radiating outwards and ideas are spreading. And really, like a lot of the natural world, perhaps like mycelium networks, human networks are very much connected, and ideas spread that way outwards through a web. So that's hugely important, just to keep telling these stories that are helpful to systems change. And you can, I've got the link there, but you can also just probably Google that by looking for Stanford Social Innovation Review and using story to change systems. A lot of you will be also very familiar with this graphic from the Buchanan Institute, but to use Ella's functions of story here and just look at them, then this is where perhaps stories as light is really important, is to really shine a light on those pioneers, get the first examples out there of people doing new things. And also there's an interesting piece around hospice work here and shining a light on that as well, so that it brings people a degree of comfort as we're moving into a new system, that there is a way for the old system to more gracefully decline or come out of use or existence. And I mean, as we get moving around down here in the emergent system, you see stories as web becoming much more important. We're building networks. Down here, you've got the glue and the cohesion as those stories are starting to stick together and make a lot more sense for people. Just a few tools in the toolkit to finish off the presentation part of my session today. I'm very much around human-centric storytelling. So at the heart of any system, no matter whether you're talking about local food or education or democracy or whatever it is, there are always people. There are always people with complex, messy lives who have hopes and dreams and goals and challenges. So finding a human in any sort of story is hugely important to me, and focusing on their intrinsic values. What is it that really motivates them? And an interesting piece around intrinsic values is that there's some research done by the Common Cause Foundation, I think it's based in the UK, and they find that from people across all sides of the political spectrum, most people think that they themselves, their actions and behaviours are driven by their intrinsic values. So values of caring, of love, community, of compassion. And equally, everybody seems to think, or most people seem to think, that other people are driven more by extrinsic values. So values of success and recognition and popularity and image, which is fascinating because it means that everybody thinks that they are a more pure or motivated person than other people. There's an interesting piece around thematic versus episodic storytelling, and that I can put that link actually in the chat once I've done finished this presentation. That Frameworks Academy link there is it's about a 40 to 45 minute free course that you can do online that really explains the difference between these two forms of storytelling. But in essence, thematic storytelling very much is what we're looking for in systems change. It brings it brings together all of the elements of what is happening in any specific news media story or whatever it might be, and then contrasts that with the way that some other news media tell very episodic stories that only have the facts or the details of that very one specific case study of whatever the story is. Whereas the thematic storytelling brings in a lot more of the context, and as the frameworks link would imply, it widens the lens of what the viewer or the receiver of the story gets to understand. So I highly recommend checking that out. And then one thing I've been thinking a lot about recently is this concept of the hero's journey arc and the hero's journey narrative. And my view is that, you know, it's in many ways it's not suited to the work of systems change, because it often is highly individual and has a beginning and a middle and an end, and then what happens after the end of the hero's journey. So I've been, you know, playing with this idea of a collective hero's journey for humanity, where there are many heroes. And of course, in the work of systems change, there are hundreds, thousands, millions of everyday heroes. And they are all connected. Their work is all connected, not in very obvious ways, often sometimes tenuous, but certainly, you know, one story's sidekick or villain might be a different story's hero. And I'd just finish on a slide to illustrate that the world of Marvel and DC Comics. I'm not a big comic book fan or comic movie fan, but they certainly do this very well, in that, you know, you've got Iron Man up here, who's the hero of this movie, but then in another movie is a sidekick, or is even pitched as a villain in this movie here against Captain America. And then you've got, you know, other people that might appear in one movie, and here's a hero's journey about them. And so yeah, there's a lot to be learned, I guess, from these forms of very world building forms of storytelling. That is the end of my presentation. I've got my details there, and I can share this deck as well with people. My first book, A Future Untold, is launching on the 28th of October next month, and it is about the power of story to transform the world and ourselves. And I speak about a little bit what I've talked about here in today's presentation, as well as, you know, how we can really start to shift these big societal narratives that underpin our understanding of the way things are. I'll stop sharing my screen there, because we're going to move into a bit more of an interactive session. How's everybody feeling? Good? Okay. All right, it's about 9:15, and I think we had about an hour set aside for this session. Where I want to go to from here is to start thinking about the theme of the conference a little bit more, which is, of course, the role of local economies, or how systems can change through the nurturing of local economies. And so we're going to go into a couple of breakout sessions shortly. We're going to, and Caroline, I think, what have we got? We've got 17 people in here. I think if we go into groups of perhaps 3, that might be ideal. If we could split everybody into groups of 3, and let's give us 12 minutes. Actually, make it 15 minutes, and because I've finished a little bit earlier than I thought with the presentation. So 15 minutes, and there are 2 questions that I want to ask, and I'll put them in the chat window as well, so that everybody can see them. But the first one is to explore in your small groups, what is the role, what are the dominant narratives that are underpinning our current global economic system. So that is, the system that we are most familiar with in terms of global export and doing business with countries all around the world. So very much a non-localized economy. What are these dominant narratives that are perhaps hindering the strengthening of local economies? So I'll put that one in the chat there. And then perhaps maybe spend about the first half discussing those. And from there, have a discussion around what are the new narratives or myths that can support localized economies. So how might we reframe those old narratives that are undermining local economies and doing some degree of harm? How might we reframe that and come up with some new narratives or assumptions or very grounding stories around local economy movements? So I've put both of those in the chat, and yeah, I think let's shoot out for 15 minutes or so.
Okay, I'm opening the breakout rooms right now.
Thank you. welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some fruitful discussion in your breakout rooms. We certainly got into some great nitty-gritty there. I'd like to share for a few minutes with the group now and give you all the opportunity to share some reflections of what came out, and then we're going to do a quick collaborative online exercise to move into the next breakout session as well. So would anybody like to share some key things that came up for them in their groups? And Caroline is saying please raise your hand with the raise hand function there if you'd like to share something.
Yeah, just a real quick reflection. As much as I enjoyed yesterday's sessions, when I got home last night and was kind of musing over what my experience had been during the course of the day yesterday, I thought, Brian, you really are not doing very well across gender. And so I got an opportunity, Alina, to kind of work with that just over the last few minutes. So I think I got through it okay. I don't feel wounded, So,
that's great. Would you like to share any quick highlights of what that looked like for you, Brian?
My preference would be to invite the response of either of the two other participants, if they care to. That'd be my preference.
Any of Brian's room buddies like to say something? It looks like Arlene is signaling there.
It was just Jessica Wu and me. And I'm not sure what Jessica might want to add. I thought it was a great conversation. It was kind of difficult because we were having trouble hearing each other and some of the connectivity was not fully consistent, but we shared some thoughts and some ideas, and I really appreciated having a chance to chat. I love this breakout room opportunity to get to talk one-on-one with people. So thank you for that. And Jessica was our other participant.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have my video, but we did end up talking a little bit about gender and how some things are embedded culturally in how we think about things, and sometimes it expresses it in maybe unconscious ways. And we talked a little bit about some different frameworks, but I don't think we didn't really discuss we talked a little bit about the questions, but we didn't get to the second one.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jessica. I see Gary has his hand raised, and I think after Gary, we'll stop it there, and we're going to go into a quick exercise on a different platform that you should be able to all participate in. So, Gary.
For the first kind of question, we kind of noticed it's like things like empirism, the patriarchy, extractionism, and that kind of myth of scarcity are kind of the things hindering. And then for the things like the new myths, or actually even like the green economy we've talked about a little bit, like having a better rail system would be, and public transit would be better than everyone having an EV type setup. And then for the kind of second question, it was more of like building like a regenerative or resilient communities, community gardening, and more things like that. Those are kind of new narratives that we kind of see popping up nationally and kind of in our own local stuff. And thanks for putting me in a room with Nina. It turns out she just lives up I-5 from me over here in Oregon, so we're not too far away.
Oh, amazing. Gary, I have to ask, is that a virtual background, or are you actually sitting in that place where you are?
I'm not sitting in that place. No, my actual background.
I was going to say, that looks like such an amazing place to be. We're going to do a quick experiment now, and I'm hoping this will work. It's a new platform. I've used it before as a participant, but never as a person running a call. So I'm putting in the chat window a link to a platform called Easy Retro. And it looks to me like most of you are on a laptop or desktop rather than a phone. So that should be reasonably easy to just open a tab and follow that link. And once you're in there, you'll see a board and a space where you can share a thought. And what I'd love is for you to share any of those new narratives that came up for you in our rooms. And see if you can encapsulate them in one sentence, or such as, you know, the a narrative of valuing the roles of all genders, or whatever it might be. So if you jump in there, you won't be able to see other people's responses just yet. I think I can reveal those shortly. Is everybody able to get into the board? Anybody having troubles with that? Okay. Grand, we've got one showing up there. We'll just take a couple of minutes to put our answers in here. So you can put as many of the new narratives that come up for you as you like. Be great to get a few more on the board there, and then we're gonna have a look at each other's, and you'll each have a couple of votes to see what resonates with you. Okay. Give you another 30 seconds or so to add any final thoughts that you might want to there. And now you should all be able to see everybody's responses. Is that the case? So you each have a couple of votes. So I'd encourage you with that little thumbs up that's on the far right-hand side of each of these cards. Just throw in a vote. You each have 2 votes for which of these new narratives of local economies is resonating with you the most.
Alina, you are muted. I don't know if you're talking to the audience or to someone back there.
Thank you, Caroline. Carolina, I was absolutely talking.
How do we vote? How do we vote? Do we click on something?
There's a little thumbs up icon at the right-hand side of your of those cards of each statement. Can you see that? And it's next to a little speech bubble. So what I'm seeing is that the ones that seem to be resonating most are shifting focus from too much of the outer world to the inner human experience, moving together, leaving nobody behind, moving from a narrative that is materialistic and individualistic and fearful to competitive to one that's based on cooperation, community, connection, and compassion. Some really inspiring new narratives of our new world there. What I'd like to do now is just throw us all back into those rooms, and we'll have a quick 5-minute discussion. Perhaps choose one of those new narratives. It doesn't have to be one of the ones that's up on the board there. It could be something that you discussed in your group earlier, but let's just take 5 minutes to come up with some of the new stories that we could tell that would support the proliferation of that new narrative.
Okay, opening the rooms now.
Thank you, Carolina. Wonderful. Well, I hope you all came up with some interesting stories of examples how we might, illustrate those narratives going forward. I had originally planned to have a bit of a group discussion around them, but I think we've run up on time, so I'll leave it there. And I think we're going to shift energies now. Is that correct, Carolina? Am I going straight into some poetry, or is there something to happen in between?
There is nothing to happen in between. We can take a little break, or actually some people can share if you need a little bit of rest. But Alina is going to perform for us some of her wonderful spoken word that she does under her alias Ali Jax.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, to give you a little bit of background there, I've been performing spoken word poetry for around 11 or 12 years now. I discovered the art form in Canada when I was living in central Canada, and prior to that I had always written a little bit of poetry, but it never really occurred to me that it could be an entertaining and very powerful thing to share it aloud with people. So I'll probably do perhaps, I think, 3 poems for you today. Each of them is around 4 or 5 minutes long. So I encourage you to just sit back and listen. And as a minor plug, these are all poems in my forthcoming book as well. The book is very much, it's somewhat memoir style. It's designed to be an inspirational read. It's not a book of poetry, but there are 4 poems in the book that break up the sections, and these are also each linked with QR codes to online performances and videos of the poems. Since I was always very reluctant to put my poetry into print, this is a way that I can reconcile that and still have people experience the full experience of the voice and the tone and the body language of a poem. The first piece I would like to do is called A Cure for Them. And we've been chatting with around some of these themes already today, around the themes of oneness. And this poem is in response to a very troubling trend that I see around political polarization all over the world. And I apologize if you're getting a little bit of noise from the rain on the roof. I'm in a room with a skylight, and there's heavy rain going on. Okay, good. Wonderful. I think I'll just crack into it. If we are to believe the stories that dominate our social media feed, there are an evil group of people out there who are out to destroy our lives. They do not share our values. They have no common sense. They will take away your freedom, bombard you with fake news, brainwashing your children with their propaganda. They will do everything in their power to take away all that you hold sacred. Beware. They are out there. The people we call them. Them, the enemy. Them, those other ones. Them, the ones we must overcome, the target of every comment section everywhere. So confident are we that we are the ones who are right. We have turned respectful public debate into millions of miniature individual dictatorships of the mind. The teeth of our savage sound bites grow ever sharper by the day, while indignant ears grow deaf to anything that does not reinforce our worldview. There is no room for reason in a lynch mob. No longer a gift in give and take. No space for context and complexity in a 280-character tweet. The air is growing thin in this here echo chamber. It's getting harder and harder to breathe. We need not even look too far before we can identify a them. Even amongst brothers and sisters in arms, sibling rivalry cuts deep. The climate activist may query the urgency of queer rights if we have no habitable planet to call our home. The unionist challenges foreign aid when a working wage can't even feed our own people. We hear it's the immigrants who are the problem. Or those people in SUVs. No, it's the dairy farmers, the greenies, the feminists, the TERFs, the bankers, the church, the NRA. It's corporate welfare, guerrilla warfare. It's the liberal media, the gay agenda. It's them, it's they, it's those people. If only they would stop. Listen. Do you hear that? That is the sound of singular stories. It is the sound of petty distractions. It is the sound of red herrings gasping for breath as the future slips away. Oblivious to our own hypocrisy and wasting our precious energy, we are setting ourselves on fire in the hopes that they will die of smoke inhalation. It need not be this way. We can be better than this. We have the cure for them. It's simple. It is us. What if we took our pointing fingers and we turned them upside down to extend the gentle hand of compromise? Offered up our gifts and contributions with open hearts, embracing grace and humility. That's not to say that we should deny the role of privilege, ignore the wounds from the past, or cease to pursue our passion for change. After all, even the Buddha taught non-violence, not pacifism. But let us dismantle systems of oppression without creating carbon copies addressed to them. Step away from the militancy you have held so close as a lover. Soften your heart and walk a mile in shoes that do not fit, shoes that cause you discomfort, blisters edging their way in beneath the soles of the feet you have so firmly planted into the arguments you've convinced yourself are solid. This place is familiar, it is comfortable, but we desperately need to stand upon common ground. For it is there that we can pinpoint the underlying causes behind our addiction to outrage. Feelings of grief, of losing that which we hold dear. Feelings of fear, of those who we do not understand. Feelings of pain, of leaning into the despair of not knowing how the hell we are going to get ourselves out of this mess. Respect the collective wisdom that comes from listening to many voices that are different from your own. Find your passion and then you do you, and do it well while simultaneously seeking to understand why it is that they care so deeply about something else. According to particle physics, we exchange 98% of the atoms in our bodies with the world around us every year. So I am you, and you are me. And they are us, and we are them. We are them. We are them. To somebody, somewhere, you are them. Thank you. Yeah, so we had a little bit of talk in our breakout room around that idea of the inner and an outer world and bringing everybody with us, because we are essentially all one. I'd like to share a poem now, which was the first spoken word piece I ever wrote, actually. And I'll give a little bit of context to this poem so you know what I'm talking about. I was working as an environmental advocacy water issues coordinator in Saskatchewan in Canada 12 years ago, and I wanted to come up with a way of really making water conservation more tangible in this reasonably dry prairie province that in the summer was prone to drought. And that was part of my work, was teaching around water conservation. And I put myself to this challenge of using no more than 25 litres of water per day for 1 month to meet all my daily needs. So to just give you a sense of what that looks like, it's about this much cubed is 25 litres of water per day, one of those carry containers. So not a lot. The average Canadian at the time was using around 330 litres of water per day. And that was to meet all my daily needs around cooking, bathing, flushing the toilet, doing laundry, drinking, everything. And around the same time, I discovered spoken word poetry. So I thought this was a really interesting way to to share that message. And as it turned out, this really kicked off my career into storytelling and narrative for change, as I became much more aware of just how powerful words could be when told in a story format rather than presented as fact. So this is the water poem. I haven't had a shower in 28 days. And it's fair to say that nobody executes a sponge bath quite the way that I do. I've earned my black belt and a PhD in the ancient art of sponge bathery. Tomorrow's job? Bucket laundry. Is my plumbing broken? Is my bathroom being renovated? No, this is about me using my voice, and this is about those who have no choice. And the reason I do this is to make you think. How much water was used when you were last at the kitchen sink? And between your ingrained habits and the taxes you pay and the ability of your grandchildren to freely play in a lake devoid of blue-green algae, between the energy used to pump sacred life into your home through subterranean water highways, between all of these things, can you make a link? 25 litres a day is all I'm allowed. This manic month of scribbling and jotting. I am the calorie counter of the water world. And now I realize with the sharp clarity and the sudden compulsion of somebody who's rapidly losing her footing in the crumbling sandstone on the brink of an OCD chasm, why diets never work. I want to etch on your minds with a water-based ink. And I want you all to be thinking about how much water you use and how much you abuse. I've been labeled alarmist, a crazy hippie, and more by those trolling from the far side of a distant keyboard. Now, as I measure out bathing water, I can almost already feel the sleek ribbons of cascading warmth soon to be delivered by my trusty yogurt container. This sponge bath is earned, and I'll enjoy it more than ever before that I've reached out to turn on the shower dial. Up the stairs with my bucket, and I'm careful not to slop. I can't afford to waste a single drop. Into the bathroom, ready to go with my luxury steaming H2O. No! Tragedy has struck. In my haste, I have stumbled and spilled my bucket, and I watch my efforts drain away. Blue gold on porcelain in the bottom of the tub. And now I must walk downstairs, measure out more water, and return to the stove with it. The novelty has worn off, and at this stage, I'm over it. Still, I walk down 16 stairs, and it sure as hell beats 16 miles. From a sun-baked village on a dusty road, a woman with a jug on her head she goes. And where this woman she goes, she walks with her hopes and she walks with her dreams, and she wonders if anyone hears her story. In 3 short days, my stand of solidarity comes to an end, but I will not forget. Her story echoes in each drip of a leaky shower head, in every careless flush. The weight of her clay jug sits on my shoulders each time I see somebody turn their back on a running tap. Tomorrow's wars won't be fought over a thirst for oil, but over thirst in and of itself. With 3 days to go, I'm struck by the irony that water makes up 70% of my body. So when the wells run dry and the fields turn to dust, I wonder, will they be coming to tap me? Thank you. I changed the ending of that poem originally. It was much angrier and very very naming and shaming of all the multinational water corporations involved in water exploitation around the world. But I decided to bring more people on board and be less adversarial, that I would change it. But I still sometimes do the other ending. I'd like to share one more with you today, which is about it's about climate change and how we've got here, but really it's about 75,000 years of human history as well. So this last one is called Big World, Small Planet, the remix. Some of you may be familiar with Johan Rockström's book, Big World, Small Planet. And he's one of the lead architects of planetary boundaries theory. Yes, this book was very much inspired. This poem was inspired by his book, Big World, Small Planet, the remix. "75,000 years ago, on a high plateau in what will one day become Ethiopia, a woman scans the barren ground for seeds and berries, tightens the furs-binding baby to her breast, oblivious that she holds in her hands the future of the human race. On the brink of extinction, humanity's population has dwindled to just a mere 1,000. Perhaps just a few thousand of us remain on the face of the earth. Just a blip in human history, merely a moment in time, but it is the story we never hear about how we almost disappeared. Some 10,000 years ago, upon the alluvial plains of Mesopotamia, an aging farmer gazes out across a golden field of barley. The ancient ones speak of a time when food was foraged from the wild, but he has planted with intent. Master of his own destiny, he is blissfully unaware that this very moment in time marks the inception of humanity's ascent. The following millennia will see us at our best and worst, from conquests and crusades, witch trials and slaves, to Renaissance arts, mathematics, medicine, and the discoveries of space. In 1804, on the filthy wooden floor of a London slum, a young mother unwittingly gives birth to the billionth living member of the human race. 40 years later, her son mops his sodden brow, shoveling coal into the insatiable fiery mouth of a shining new steam engine. Soot black-eyed and bone-broke weary, he is building the future of industry. He is progressing the human race. A 1950s housewife rides shotgun in a 57 Chevrolet Bel Air, sits proudly beside her husband, who represents the 1/6 of working-age American adults to be employed by the automobile industry at the time. Oblivious to unintended consequences, they are paving freeways across the future. In 2008, from the elevated porch of a longhouse in Borneo, an elder surveys the thick, dark smoke blanketing a land where forest fires are foreign. The rainforest slash and burn makes way for monocultural palm oil. The fires burn so vast that the collective smoke cloud would account for 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions that year. It is this year, and we are no longer unaware. No longer averting our eyes from the caged canary that has been lying unmoving for quite some time now. It is this year, and the earth is submitting her invoices for the streets we have paved with gold, and payment needs to be underwritten by a monumental mind shift. It is time for us to step up and respect the boundaries of just how far we can push this planet, become collective stewards of our collective futures, realize just how much our livelihoods depend on it. We live in a globalized community, a big world on a small planet, where our every flutter of a butterfly wing can either serve to strengthen the hurricane or fuel the winds of change. And like it or not, these days we make our homes in each other's backyards. The Nigerian farmer whose dreams wash away with the soils after every season's floods, the rain no longer soaking the earth, that man is your neighbor. The machete-wielding clear-cutter lives in the Amazon basin next door. Look into the eyes of the Congolese youth, risking life and limb in civil conflict to mine the minerals for our mobile phones, and you will find a brother. This is not about sacrifice, but about embracing our full potential. Not about saying no, but about embracing a resounding yes. This is about building the house of humanity with hard hats and steel-toed boots, traveling the mountain roads of our destiny with guardrails to mark out the cliffs. This is about humanity growing up and moving out of mama's home, learning how to do our own laundry, stepping from adolescence into adulthood and embracing responsibility. 100 billion moments of human history have brought us to this point. 100 billion blips. In late 2017 in Wellington, New Zealand, a woman enters a fertility clinic with bated breath. 9 months later, scanning the future for some seeds of change and berries of hope, tightening the sling-binding baby to my breast, I hold one tiny contribution to the future of the human race. In every blink of my daughter's eyes, a blip in history. In every blip, a reminder of a global citizen in the making, already taking notes. Thank you. Thank you all for hanging on and listening. I know it's quite late over there in Europe, where a lot of you are. And yeah, thank you again to Carolina and Roar and Roshni and everybody at the Systems Change Alliance for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Selena, for that amazing presentation. These poems are really powerful, filled with deep, heartfelt stories, and at the same time, very inspiring. And I think signifying this new art that is emerging and is part of the systems change story and the systems change movement in the making. Thank you so much. So with that, I want to thank everyone that has been part of this event, this conference over this last few days. My name is Roar Bionis. I'm one of the co-founders of System Change Alliance. And this conference, which has been about systems change through local economies, have covered basically 4 different themes: relief, survival, and resilience, climate change, ecology, and the local economy, and eco-villages and community action and bioregional economies. And we have had so many amazing speakers over these past 3 days, from Elena Norberg-Hodge from Local Futures, Daniel Christian Wall. We have had people from Shareable, Neil Gernflo and Tom Llewellyn. And from EDA, we had representation of James Cooligan, the economist. We have heard from Matt Oppenheim about the importance of place, the sacredness of place, and ontology of place. We have visited Devon and heard from Isabel Carlisle. And we have heard from Francisco Dines in Portugal, and also Andre Vachist, and finally today Alina Siegfried, and not to forget Demeter Rousseau from Haiti, talking about his amazing project and work there. and also from Portugal, Miguel Almeida and Francisco Freire, and then Kate Pearl. So an amazing array of presenters. And this event has given me so much hope, and because the system change movement is alive and well all over the world and is expressing itself in so many different projects, so many different endeavors on an individual and collective level. And it gives us so much hope for the future, despite all of the problems that the planet is facing. If we are facing those problems together in coordinated cooperation, creating a new vision, a new story, as Alina just talked about, a new narrative, then I think there's great hope that we're going to be able to pull through this together, despite all of the obstacles that we are facing. So with that, I want to thank everyone that has attended. Please check out our website, systemchangealliance.org, and our Facebook page, and all of the live streaming of the different programs. And I hope that we can collaborate somehow in the future. You can volunteer with us. Please contact us if you would like to help out. So thank you so much to everyone that has participated, listened in, and come up with many important questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening or a good day wherever you are, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
All right.